What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Hey, welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. This is your host, Tom Tona. I'm here with Juliet, my co-host. What's going on, Jules?
Hi, welcome back, everybody.
Today's guest is Bill Umansky, also known as the Lawman. Bill is... Listen, that's how Bill does it on his cut when he cuts his podcast. Bill is an Orlando, Florida-based attorney with over 30 years of experience. He has his own practice, the Umansky Law Firm, and he specializes in offering second chances to his clients who've been injured as a result of somebody else's negligence or who've been charged with a crime. His firm focuses on personal injury for plaintiffs and criminal defense work. Bill's main goal is finding justice for clients, protecting them against governmental prosecution in criminal cases, and getting them fair compensation for their injuries in personal injury. Bill personally handles cases. His main goal, whether it's an injured party or a criminally charged client, is giving power back to the client and helping them move forward in a positive direction. He's got a long list of recognitions. He graduated cum laude from University of South Florida with a bachelor's degree in psychology, which I want to dive deep on with Bill, and obtaining a law degree from University of Florida College of Law. One of the things that I found pretty notable about Bill is that he studied at the Tulane Institute of European Legal Studies in Paris, France. It's one of my favorite cities, so I'm definitely going to be talking to him about that. He's been quoted or appeared in many national media outlets, including USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, People Magazine, and all of the major TV outlets, NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox affiliates around the country. He also speaks publicly around the country and is the author of several books, including a best-selling Amazon law practice book called Tiger Tactics. So there's a lot of lawyers that listen to this podcast. If you have not read the first Tiger Tactics book, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's excellent. I've read it. I loved it. And they're coming out with a Tiger Tactics CEO version, which is coming out, I think, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, which I think I've already placed the pre-order for. Bill's an all-around great guy. Love the guy. I met him through John Fisher's mastermind, and I will tell you that he's a facilitator. He's facilitated the last 2 groups that I've been in, and the guy just knows his stuff. Like, he's just amazing at what he does. So without further ado, here's the Lawman. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast. I just want to say how excited I am to have you, and welcome to the Lead Counsel Podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys. What I'm really focused on is I'm looking at my hair, and I think I'm going to end up like you soon because I'm realizing how much hair I've lost.
You look good, man. You look good. You're always very fashionably dressed. I told my wife, I said, listen, I'm going to be running into Bill in a couple of masterminds, and the guy got the A game of sports jackets and stuff. So it's time for me to go shopping. I got to up my game. You're always dressed so tight, man. I love it.
Yeah, don't worry. Tom's always looking at his hair.
The hair I used to have. So, Bill, I wanted to have you on, and I'm not just saying this, that the minute I met you at the John Fisher Mastermind, I was just really blown away by a couple of things that we'll talk about today. The way you facilitated the group, the opening remarks, and now I've been in 2 groups that you facilitated. I was just kind of blown away by you. Right. And then I started really digging deep on your podcast, and it's now become my favorite legal podcast. And I would say that to anybody who's listening to this, if you have not, and a lot of people have, but if you have not tuned into the Lawman's Lounge, I mean, you got a killer lineup of guests.
Thank you for that. But I think it's just a matter of just getting people on there. And as you know, building connections, because you are a very open guy and you're able to connect with people. And I think, for instance, without getting into names, because we want to protect our mastermind, you were able to help someone and you called them out so that he'd actually listen to you. And that's the kind of people that we need in our profession to help each other.
And I think that, again, I learned so much from you, like the facilitation you do. So let's just jump right in. You started off with not this past mastermind, the mastermind before, with the question, how are you? Right? And you were like, I didn't really prepare. I flew in last minute. And I was like, by the end of that speech, you had everybody riveted because, and I'm going to summarize it. And if I get it wrong, just say something. But you asked the how are you? And then, everybody does what they normally do, which is all bullshit, right? And what I love about you is that and your podcast, right, is the no bullshit rule. The no bullshit rule. Like, don't tell me what you think everybody wants to hear. How are you really? And that's the connection building that you are so masterful at. And I also think that's why your podcast is so awesome, because you really get to the heart of the real stuff. And I just think that's incredible.
I make fun of life coaching, but in a way, the people that do it really, really well are bringing you forward, not back. I think it's important to go back to your traumas and understand what your relationships are. So when I got to Strategic Coach, I just ate everything up and I started reading all of Dan Sullivan's books and then started doing all these masterminds. And I was really riveted on the ones that would get real as opposed to the ones that were trying to suck you in for 10 grand and show you how much money you have or how much money other people had. I kind of stuck to the ones that gave real value. And then from that, there's just an osmosis thing. So I think you have to be effed up in order to be a coach, a good coach. I always wonder, this is probably really bad, but like I'm a Jew who converted to Christianity.
I heard that about you. I was listening to your podcast on it when you talked to Feinberg, right?
Yeah.
Feinberg? Yeah, when you were talking to him about it, which I actually found fascinating, that you converted.
So I just look at Jesus' first 33 years on this earth, and we don't know much about what he did for first 33 years, assuming that Jesus existed, because even though I'm Christian, I still act as a Jew and I still question whether he exists. I just love the idea of Jesus, but I'll say the first 33 years, Tom, we don't know what he did. I like to think that he came down and did a whole bunch of crap, so that for the last year of his life, the last 2 years of his life, when people were like, he had the perfect answer. It's either because he was the son of God or he'd been through so much stuff, mistakes, sins, or whatever, he was able to address most people. And not to talk about religion, because that doesn't matter that you're Hindu, Muslim, whatever, but I feel like coaching is the same way. Like, if you've made those mistakes, if you've actually felt what people felt, if you're empathetic and understand where they come from, then you're really able to help them move forward because you were back then where they were at. And so that's what I think it became so easy for me to facilitate. It's because I've been there. So in our example, you're a very, very successful lawyer. You know systems way better than I ever would or ever want to. Money has not been my driver. Big mistake, except I would say to you that when another person comes into an environment who makes a lot more money a different way, and you can understand their perspective, and they'll sit there and you're able, like you did, to say, you don't really respect me. I mean, that kind of honesty with most people will get them off the block because you already know yourself, you know what mistakes you are, and you know who you are and who you're not. And so it's the same thing with coaching. So if you know who you are, which in my case, I only know about 90% of myself. I say I'm 97% authentic. There's 3% I hold back from the world on purpose. But also, I 90% know myself. There's also a willingness to understand at 57, I'm not 77. And when I'm 77 and have even more ear hair and nose hair and shit, I'll probably know more about myself. So, it's just a matter of not prejudging other people, understanding where they come from, knowing where you came from. And I think the most important thing is listening. I think if you have the ability to listen, which I didn't as of 5 years ago, now I listen. So and that's why it's hard to be a guest on a podcast, because you're asking me questions, and it's much easier for me to ask both of you questions, and
Right.
As opposed to talking a lot.
Which you'll have your turn, and I will be as authentic as I can be, right? And I will tell you that was one of the things that struck me was how good of a listener you are. It was aspirational for me because Jules and I both are talkaholics, so bad that we had to read the book Shut the Fuck Up, because we like to talk, we love to, and we get excited. So all of a sudden now I'm like, Jules, you got to edit out 80% of what I was saying to let the guest shine through, right? But I just get excited. I really just think it's an enthusiasm thing. But not only are you a fantastic listener, I think one of the key things that I learned from you is the questions you ask. Like, you're always asking really probing questions and then listening and then asking more questions. So do you chalk that up to the years of the trial work and the litigation that you did, or just curiosity?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was a pretty successful trial lawyer. The reason why I say pretty, I said reasonably successful because I had won almost every single case that I tried as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. But the problem was that the good thing is that I listened to the jury. I listened to them, and I understood that was the most important thing. But I would say to you that I was not a great trial lawyer because I was also picked and chose all my cases. And while that's smart to do for a win record, that is not what the great ones do. And I would tell you that I got out and switched to the business side before ever discovering greatness, I would say to you. But I do think listening to the jury was the primary function of how I learned how to listen to other people, but it was not natural for me to listen even then. I feel like when you're on goal, when you're on target, when you're listening, when you listen for a reason, my whole thing was to win at all costs. So I knew that the jury was the most important thing. So I forced myself to listen, but I wasn't a natural listener. I actually didn't give a shit. The truth is, I didn't care about anyone other than my win record. And I would say I was borderline narcissistic. So I feel like the listening part, I always was a sensitive kid. But when I got to that stage of overcoming these demons and being in that situation, I think that the listening was an evolution that happened in my 50s, Tom. Honestly.
Okay.
If I'm being
so how did you learn to become a good listener? As I interrupt you, I'm just interrupting you, but how did you learn to become a good listener? Because it's something that I aspire to. I am literally trying every day to become a better active listener, even at home. It's not something that comes natural, I think, to most people. So what was your secret? I mean, because dude, whether you think you are or not, right now, I've observed you during those facilitations on those groups you've run, and I've watched the notes you take and the questions and follow-up questions. You are a good listener now, in my opinion.
It seems as though it's a skill you really have to practice at and build up, and you've had years to build that up in the courtroom, right?
I love your question. So I don't think it's from the years of being in the courtroom, because I was the type of person, I'm a very, very aggressive guy in the past, and also very defensive in the past, and also had a tremendous ego matched with a low sense of self, a low sense of insecurity, a high sense of insecurity. So I was always on real hard edge, and that's not someone that can create a listener. So to answer your second part is no, I did not learn it in the courtroom. I learned it, well, I'm going to answer your question. It is by reps. So in sales, there's reps. You got to get the reps in. You got to get the reps. So it's the same thing with listening. So by becoming more of a stoic, which I'm still not fully stoic, and putting down my ego and developing more comfort in who I am, I'm on a text chain with about 20 guys, and they'll call me all kinds of things. One is a CB, and I don't want to mention that on your podcast. They'll say all kinds of things about my toe polish and my lack of hair, and I've been made fun of my entire life. It's only until the last 10 years I started really going, that's kind of cool. That's what draws me to people, is people making fun of me. And then accepting that and becoming more confident, and then hitting your 50s and being like, I was sure I was pretty confident in my 40s, but just a different level. So then when I put down the ego and became more confident, Jules, I think the reps have to happen. I had to do the reps. I had to ask the questions. And then more importantly, I had to wait not to interject my own story, because sometimes people want you to entertain them and they want you to keep, I'm not saying I'm funny, but people like laughing, and you can get off on making people laugh and feel good. So it's focusing on the reps, and it is discipline. So I did that the whole lunch, and actually I felt better about it because I got to really know this guy. Fathers in Winter Park, came from a family of lawyers, why he went to school, what he did before he became a lawyer, what he likes, what his marriage is like. All of these things I was able to ask him. And I said, next time, he's going to take me to lunch. Go, next time I'm going to do the talking and entertaining. And we're probably going to go out for a drink, and that's where it'll be natural to do that. Does that make sense?
Well, it's funny because you are like the life of the party, right? Like if we're in a room of like 50 people gravitate towards you and I think it's, one, you're kind of a raw person, right? When I say raw, I mean, you put your emotion out there in terms of your feelings about stuff. And again, it's the environment we're in with the masterminds. But I think what that does is it allows us all to drop the pretense, cut the bullshit, and get real with each other. But I guarantee you that guy walked away from that lunch being like, oh my God, he was an amazing guy. Because anytime I've done that with people where I make a concerted effort, you can see that it changes them, right? Like people want to tell you their stories. People want to be heard. So, I think that putting in the reps and the focus and discipline, it's hard work, man. It's hard work. Everybody loves to talk. So yeah, being a good listener is a rare thing. So I had the epiphany, I don't know, what was it, like a year ago when we were like, oh my God, the two of us never shut the fuck up. Like
we could talk for hours.
And I was like, I wanted the podcast to be about the guest. I didn't want it to be about me. So I read this book, and it wasn't it's a good book, but it was more of a reminder to just be a better listener and focusing on it. But I do think it comes with age. At 55, I don't have anything to prove. So I don't need to be the guy that's talking all the time. It's a mental thing. I got to go into it with, I got to shut up. I got to shut up. I got to shut the fuck up.
And it helps because anytime Tom and I are in a room together and one of us is like talking too much, we have a good relationship where we can kind of just look at each other and be like, hey, shut the fuck up. Like, just kind of talking too much.
Yeah, so.
Sometimes when you're in the right place and the right time, it's okay to be the one that's being the center of attention and telling those stories, because the stories are, it's not ego-based. It's some crazy shit, and people are entertained by that. But,
yeah.
Go ahead, Jules. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I agree. I also think just about reading the room, because you could be in a room full of people who don't necessarily like to talk about themselves, and then you could be the one to carry the conversation. And I think what you were saying about the story is that's more about connecting with people, and you could build those connections easily if you are a good talker, but it's really about right time, right place, and knowing the room that you're in.
So that almost comes down to like a sensitivity, knowing the right room, knowing the right time, the right place, and when people need to talk. I think that, tying it into what you do, personal injury and criminal defense, how many lawyers, all they do is talk at the client when all clients want is to be heard, right? So, that I think it's a very valuable skill. And as I watch you do it and other people do it, I realize and I do think it's wisdom that comes with age. I'm 55, you're 57. So, I do think that that's kind of a wisdom thing. It's different when you're in your 20s.
Yeah, Jules is 52, so...
I'll get there eventually. I try to learn as much as I can at the same.
We are both two times how old Jules is, Bill.
Yeah. So, but what's interesting about that is, but Jules brought up another point, which is completely separate than the reps, which just made me think. reading the room. I think that's great that you said that, because I'm thinking to myself, like, do I read a room? Because I think that there are times where, my friends would call me that name that I used before, would say that I don't know how to read a room, because you're going out to a bar and your friends are there for a different reason, and these other people are there for a different reason, and they want to hook up, and you're sitting there talking about, their father or their father issues, or talking about your own issues. You're killing the buzz. But what's funny is I do that on purpose. So I am reading the room, but it made me think that there are times where but I'm oblivious to the room. So if it's a mastermind, I know that that's the room I need to be there. If it's a business lunch, I know I need to be there. Even if I'm at a bar or a lounge or a club with my friends, I know what their goals are, but I'm intentionally doing it. But sometimes there are many, many times where you come in, I'm not reading a room, so I'm involved in that entertainment mode where there may be people that are not interested in receiving it, but they're laughing. But I could have gotten a lot more out of it if I had just approached the conversation differently. And that comes to like developing the connection for business. So that's something I'm going to think about, is the reading the room part, because again, it's not my natural nature to listen. And it's not my natural nature. If I'm on, I do a great job, even back in the day, picking the jury or facilitating or having a lunch. But it's those other environments where you're not thinking about work or what you're trying to get out of a situation where I may or may not be reading the room correctly.
Being exposed to you, it's got to be over a year now since I first met you. I've carried over some of the stuff I've learned from you into a recent HR conversation. And what does that look like? And I'll give you props for this. I said to my HR manager and my legal administrator, Janira, in a conversation, listen, I have very black and white thinking. And what I want you to do is keep us curious. Because especially with HR, people are complex human beings. And it's never black and white. Most of the time, it's gray. So there is no, oh, he's a dick, he's not a dick. Who knows what you had going on for the guy to say it. But I give you a lot of props for even being able to work it through with the guy. Most people would not have gone that far. So I learned that from you, where I was like, hold on, curious, remaining curious. It also helps you listen, right? It's just, but I watched you do it. I was modeling what I was watching you do that I found so effective in the facilitation. So don't be too hard on yourself, man. We all do that shit all the time.
You probably had like the resting bitch face on too, where like you're just focused and it's like people read it all over your face.
Yeah, you know what's funny? On my TikTok, I don't pay much attention to TikTok, and I don't really do a good job at it, but because I don't focus on it. Actually, I just now put recycled shit on there. But I had RDF, which is resting dick face.
That's probably fitting.
I heard a podcast recently where you described your 2015 mastermind with John Fisher, and you said something that made the room go quiet. And you kind of alluded to the darkness that you and I referred to of entrepreneurialism. Is that something you'd feel comfortable talking about? I wasn't at that mastermind. Is that something you'd feel comfortable talking about here or in a different podcast or never?
No, I don't care. You're talking about the first mastermind I was out with him?
Yeah, you brought it up on a podcast related to the 2015 mastermind. You said something, or you talked about something, and the entire room went quiet. Yeah, and I don't know.
Yeah, it was just about not having a death plan. I remember that I think I said to people, they were talking about post-selling your practice, and they were talking about what your transition plan is. And I think I said to them, to the extent that I was like, they had all gone around the room, and my issue was just basically like, guys, I don't have a plan for that. I don't plan on being on this earth very long. I just plan on living my life to the fullest. And basically, my kids are good. My wife's gorgeous. She'll get remarried. She's got insurance. Like, what do I need to worry about? Like, I don't care. I said something to the effect that I lived like a full life. And at the time I was doing 100, 110 days on the road traveling. This year is 55, but I said, I lived a life. I don't even think about that. But it did make me, I think I said it in a way that I remember, I think Neil Goldstein and some other guys, it was Tyson, some other older guys were probably like, or guys my age that they were in their 40s or late 40s then, were like, is this guy going to kill himself? Or is he just like, why doesn't he have another plan? I remember I don't think I felt dark when I said it, but then when the room went silent, I started feeling bad about myself. It was like, oh shit, I'm around really smart guys who think I should have a plan. But I had just said, like, I'm not like you guys. Like, I'm not thinking about 70s and 80s. I don't even know if I'll be here that long, nor do I care. So, but then I said, well, I probably should have a plan. And what's funny is, I guess 7 years later, I've done a lot of things in the mastermind I said I would do. One I went back on, which was sales, and I jumped in, and I'm hoping to get back out again. But the other was I never came up with a death plan. So I never came up with a plan of what I'm going to do, how I'm going to transition this, which I should. But I don't even like the word should. I just hate the word should. So.
Well, look, you mentioned the word death, demons, and a couple of other things a couple of times, but I think that's what I like about you is your authenticity, that Ryan McKean was talking about the topic of how his brain never shuts off. And I refer to that as the broken brain, like the computer just never shuts down. And so when you bring that stuff up, I don't take it as a bad thing at all that you ever should feel bad about yourself. I think that you're honest and raw, that, is very common among entrepreneurial attorneys and, law firm CEOs, that it's not talked about enough. So I don't have an issue with it at all, because, Juliet and I use that phrase pretty regularly, the whole broken brain complex of what entrepreneurial stress does to your brain, compounded with all the external stress and everything like that. So thank you for sharing that. I still don't have a succession plan hard and fast, other than building repeatable systems that hopefully there's value to, for non-attorneys, that they say, hey, this is a business income stream I want to buy. So I hope you're here till you're in your 80s, man. I'd like to get to know you better, man. You're the man. I appreciate you coming on.
It's funny. I enjoy, you're such a deep guy and you care about people. And I really appreciate that about you. You're very authentic. I don't have a problem about referring to anything. So, just as we're ending this, I told everyone in the room, I came back to my leadership team, and I've told people around town, even without the fear of, oh, they're not going to refer me business, that, several weeks ago I went dark, and I thought for about 90 seconds about taking my life. And what I did by start telling people that, what I found was that most of the people that were talking to me, and some of them are not even lawyers, some of them are Jules age or higher. And a lot of times you'll find that at a younger age where people are more forthcoming about stuff. But I found that, a couple of friends of mine said, that's not really suicidal thoughts. That's just natural thoughts. That's kind of like, that's what it's normal to feel that way. And I was like, normal? I talk about anxiety, but I don't think about stuff like that. But, it's just because it wasn't like something that lasted more than 90 seconds. It just, to me, because of our brain, or at least my brain is so, I'm such a passionate person. I went from 0 to 100, it felt like days. But I think it was an underarching thing of feeling sad and having a lower level of depression that then led to that point. And that's what I learned, which is I don't want to get back there again. But I got to tell you, this is going to sound horrible. Maybe I have to edit it out. But since I didn't kill myself, I almost feel thankful that I had that moment, because it just shook me out of this, what's the word? Not inertia.
Like a rut, maybe? What? Took you out of your rut? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, rut. Complacency, rut, stagnation, just general malaise. Rut's the perfect word for it, though, to just get out of that.
But as you're relaying that story, all I keep thinking is, it's what makes you so special is that you're willing to be fearless in your sharing of the human condition that you're experiencing that makes it okay for me to sit at a table with you, not knowing you, and saying, yeah, man, I got the same shit. I got the same shit. People look at us from the outside, and I think that's what makes it hard, right? You look at your tax return, you look at the fancy clothes or whatever it is, and you covered it with John Morgan. John said, you said to him something along the lines of, do you still feel fearful? The guy's a gazillionaire. And he's like, 100%, I still feel fear. I do it anyway, but I feel fear. And I think that that's what I keep trying to figure out why it is that I think about the way you've run those groups and our relationship as it's developed. And I think that you're very honest and open about the human condition as you're experiencing it. And people relate to that. I relate to it, which is why I'll refer you cases, because it's not fluff. It's not bullshit. I'm getting to know you on a much deeper level. And I can write to you and be like, hey, Bill, I sent you this client said blah, blah, blah. And I know I'm going to get a text back because you care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
it just happened the other day. But, I will tell you something about that which may help some of your listeners. So when I came back, I told my leadership team, there's been a woman with me for 20 years that left after 12 years and came back, worked for 8. And what's interesting is when you get to a level, she called us in after the meeting about a week later, and she, here I am telling people that I'm doing this, and I have a young male attorney that starts crying who's Jules' age. How old are you, Jules?
24.
And he's 4 years older, starts crying, and a male attorney cries, and then I leave the room. A week later, my 20-year employee who's been with me the longest, Randy's been with me for 12 or 13 years, when he says, I'm leaving. And she goes, it probably doesn't surprise you. I feel stagnated. But what happened is she was on the phone with my integrator and myself, and I was getting my nails done at the time. And I was full in on the conversation. And she said, my only reason for staying over the past 6-7 months, because I feel like you stopped paying attention to me. And I want you to know this so that going out, you'll have this for everyone else. But she said that my only connection here is Randy. And Tom, what was interesting is, I could have let this fly. I said, as you're telling me this, I got to tell you, I don't feel any emotion for you. Now, she's been a friend of mine for a long time. So she starts, what that did was, it could have gone both ways, but what it did was being so honest with her got us to a level where we then talked through it. And the reality was, because I said, well, why didn't you come to me? You could have come to me. You're 47. You could have, or 50. You could have come to me and talked to me about it. Maybe you didn't want to. But the reality is, it's still, I was having almost these negative feelings about what I felt like her being complacent without communicating it to her, despite that we had a business model that I subconsciously backed off because I was also scared of her because she's a strong personality and a strong woman, strong personality. But by telling her that truth, that the truth was, you're right, there's something wrong with us, that you're telling me you're leaving and I have absolutely no emotion at all. When I said that to her, and for your listeners, by being brave, sometimes that can backfire. The person could leave, fuck you, I'm done, I was right about you all along. No, there's none of that, because I've always taken care of them and her. And so what was interesting is at our firm meeting, she told everyone, I'm leaving, and for good reasons, but she said there's a mutual decision here, which it was mutual. She knew something was going to change after I came in. She's known me for a long time and said, shit's going to change around here. It didn't mean that she was going to be let go, but she probably pushed her to the point where I'm like, life's short and I need to take my own chances, and we've had enough time together. But that authenticity that you're talking about is, if I had not said that, she would have left. We would have repaired our relationship 3 years from now, but we actually repaired it right then and there on that spot in front of our integrator. And so much so that, we're good. And there's probably still some unsettled issues between us, but for the most part, I said, I am going to miss you now, although I'm glad you're leaving. And she's looking at me going, I'm glad you're leaving. And no one else will really understand that. It's hard for people to understand that. they all see things as black and white. Typically, like one door opens, closes. That's a good thing, a good phrase. But it's like, oh, they're leaving. There must be a reason. There was a reason. But the reality was, regardless, that reason had to happen to shift us out of a rut also. And there are going to be more changes that are going to be made in here. And I think that sometimes by being authentic, you can really repair stuff quicker, faster than before. And so, like, we're now rebranding our happy hour for her. We spent a lot of money on our first 8 years ago. We're doing a firm getaway to Efffed. And I said, hey, I'm going to rebrand it to You're Going Away. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to save money. And I told her I'm going to save money. Right. And she's going to get this big cruise to the South Mediterranean. My wife doesn't know, because my wife's view, even though she likes winning, is kind of like, you're out. Why are you spending extra money? You know, money's tight. But I'm like, yeah, she's been here 20 years. She deserves it. And my wife will be surprised. But the thing is, that authenticity that happened between us saved our relationship, which was way more important than just the work relationship. But sometimes, Tom, that can backfire. As a young lawyer in town who's starting a jury consulting business, and he kind of separated from another firm, and we were at a happy hour, and I spoke very quickly, and not reading the room, as Jules said. I came right out and go, you're doing a great job now, because you were kind of fumbling around. Well, that word fumbling around, he won't even work on our cases that are going to trial now. And really? He won't be an asshole all over town, but like, that truth will sit with him at some point when he's old enough to understand it. And I actually, by the way, called him to apologize and text him. I only do that twice. And that's it. Call, text, email, 3 times, that's it. I'm done. He can come to me now. But what was happening is that authenticity that we're talking about, that drive that we're talking about, what you share, that's very unique about you, is that fixes things immediately. And so telling people that I was in a space for 90 minutes that I I was done. And I really was, in those 90 seconds, wanted to end it. Just clears the room quickly of any bullshit, because the reality is like, some people already felt that in their lives. Other people haven't felt that in their lives. Maybe they can't even relate to it. But there's no doubt that if you're not hiding from your demons, they can't hide from their own inefficiencies, because you're not going to deal with that bullshit. You're sitting there airing yourself out. That's it. Simple.
Yeah, I think that 100%, there's a reason why the suicide rate and depression rate and alcohol rate and drug rates for attorneys is so high. And I think that no one does a service by bullshitting anybody. And listen, we sat at that table, and I'm not giving away any of the stuff that we talked about, but everybody had shared experience at that table with that darkness. And so I think and we can end it on this because I know you have to jump, but I think, and I have one more question, but I will tell you that by your transparency with that woman who was with you 20 years, you are aware of what a positive impact that had on the rest of the staff, right? In terms of hearing, this is a mutual decision. You're doing this spectacular thing to recognize her contribution for 20 years. So that vulnerability to be as courageous as you were establishes trust, and trust is the foundation of anything great that's happening in your company, right? Without trust, nothing else happens. It's the main dysfunction of every team. So keep doing what your compass is telling you, man. I know I don't have to tell you that because you live by your own code. And I think that's what I like about you, man. You're like an outlaw to a certain extent. So I'm going to conclude it with this, Bill. I ask every guest, because I want our listeners to hear this. What would you say is your biggest needle mover in your life to date?
Biggest legal maneuver?
No, needle mover, AKA the success that you've achieved in your life to 57 years old. What would you say was your biggest needle mover?
That question, I listen to one of your podcasts, actually more than one. And that question, so questions like that, I feel like so you may not know this, but I score as a free spirit. So my wife is beautiful and smart and has lots of boundaries. And my boundaries are less. I think things are in shades of gray. So when you ask someone who's a free spirit that question, it's hard to give like a legit, straight up answer, because I don't see them being a biggest, because the easy answer to get off their show and when not being authentic to you would be to say, oh yeah, EOS was a big needle mover because we implemented in it and it changed corporate culture. But that's not just been the biggest needle mover. So there's also been not waffling, staying kinetic, trusting your gut and not going away from your gut is a needle mover. And I think that when you get away from it, because of all these things about how to learn how to listen, how to be a good leader, how to, follow business systems. There's some people that are not natural gut instinct followers, and people who follow their guts can make mistakes for sure. But implementing EOS was a needle mover, but also the times I've actually listened to my gut. And what I'll say is over those careers of 30 years, if I get away from my gut, the needle stops moving. But I also want to be candid about something that I think is, I also, when I hear the word needle mover, I also look back with a level of introspection and would say to you, for those of you that are out there building your practices, I didn't move the needle enough because I stayed away and still have stayed away from what you're very good at, which is relying on people for data and looking at the money. So I have a feeling that the next needle mover for my firm, if I continue to want to grow, is to use this profit first model that I should have put into place a long time ago. And I will say to you, and we should, if you haven't had Moshe on your show, that profit first model is really interesting. You should try to get him. I'm going to get him on my show, but I would tell you that if I think that I know what the biggest needle mover would have been focusing on data and money first rather than relationships and love first. Because when you have anemic growth at 2% or 3% or 4% and either not pivoting to a new area of law or not figuring out a way of doing anything, you're not looking at data. So we have data now, and so we're still going through that for next year. We'll have much more KPIs set up. So it'll be very interesting to see whether that actually becomes a real needle mover, meaning 20 to 30% growth. But I would say to you that following your gut and also the implementation of any business system, whether it's EOS or any other business system that's out there, is definitely something that's good because of all the things that flow from that, right? Corporate culture and KPIs and right seat, right, all that stuff. But it's hard to answer that question, Tom.
I got to tell you, though, see, this is why I love you. Because in your processing through what you just told us is genius. So this is where we're going to end the show. But the only time I ever lost money was when I went against my gut. And for anybody listening to this, if you take nothing else away, that is wisdom worth its weight in gold, that as a younger man, I wish somebody would have said, look, that gnawing in your stomach is your gut telling you, don't do this deal.
And come back to the Lawman's podcast to hear the rest of it.
Now I'm screwed. On that note, Bill, thank you so much, man. You give us the links for your Instagram, TikTok. We'll get them all up. Actually, we have them. We'll get them all up on the podcast notes. And dude, you're the man. I'm really happy that we did this. Thank you.
Oh, that's
it was so
cool.
great having you on.
What, Jules?
It was so great having you on.
Yeah, come on. And we're going to do, so why don't you email, or someone else read my email, but I'm bad at email, but why don't you give me your ideas of structuring what kind of things that we can do for Tom? Because actually, what I like about that is that Tom can talk about systems, but that's brilliant, Tom. We should do exactly that, but I don't know how to.
I'll write it out.
Yeah,
I'll write it out.
I hate you, Juliet. I hate you.
I'll come up with my own questions, but I think there's got to be a way to kind of be like, how do you lead into the, like, well, I think I can naturally do it, but I'm curious to what you work with him. So if there's something, I love that idea. I'm like thinking about how to process that, which is, I don't know how you would title it or whatever, but I think that's awesome. I think that would be a great topic because it's more of I hate using the word mindset too. It's just a different topic about when entrepreneurs go against their gut. And so some of those things would be, one question that I would have is, which I don't want you to answer now, Tom, I got to go, but there are times where the business owner is going with his gut, but then the ego is involved. And so when the business owner's ego, so there's a hot girl scale complex, which is out there, which is very accurate. And it's also, I think there's another scale about when a business owner has a tremendous ego, and if they combine that, I don't know if I've ever seen it, it should be created, but it feels like it would look like that with a person's ego and then their gut instinct. Because the lower the ego, then the gut instinct is probably more accurate. The higher the ego, the gut instinct gets muted. So even though you're not following your gut, and that's what happens with certain people. So for example, not to get into politics, I think Donald Trump is a very kinetic thinker. He's a very gut-driven guy. And when he follows his gut and his ego's not in the way, he's typically right about stuff. But what happens is his ego gets in the way, and then it mutes what his gut is, and he doesn't know. So I'll give you an example with gut instinct. His gut instinct was that, for instance, something about the virus, which now all of a sudden is proven to be somewhat true. But when he makes other comments about other shit that his ego gets him completely in the way, that he actually gives a shit about something, he's completely off because he's not really following his gut, because his ego is so huge that he's not putting the ego down. So his gut is obstructed or clouded by that ego. So the questions that we're going to ask him is not just about going against his gut and losing it, but also, when is a business owner able to identify that they're safely able to follow their own gut instinct? Do they have to have some losses? And are there losses related to the obstruction that they're saying they didn't follow their gut? Or did they follow their gut and they were obfuscated by the ego? I don't know if that's making any sense, but if you want to talk about your gut instinct.
Yeah, we can. Look, I'm going to be as authentic as you are, right? And I'll go as deep as you want to go. What came into my head as you guys were about to start abusing me, and I know I'll wait till next week, but was, holy shit, everything has to do with ego versus instinct. And this is why, Bill Umansky, I'm fascinated by you, because you hone in on shit. You kind of just think it's kinetic spitballing, but you really are able to get to the meat of what is going on in a really meaningful way. Like, as you were saying it triggered in my head, it's ego, right? Like, I should have known better. And we'll save it for your show. I don't want to do it on here because I think that it could be a very good topic, because there's 25-year-old piss and vinegar professionals out there that are listening to this show. And I have some answers. I do know what it is now at 55 looking back. So yeah, man, we'll cover it then. And I got agita now even thinking about it, but I'm going to do it.
But thank you so much for everything today.
Bill, you're the best. Thank you.
I'll see you guys later.